hello students, welcome back to another session. The previous session we saw what are the different aspects of the process, that is life processes. We looked at the respiration as well as the digestion. So going forward we have looked even at the transportation in human beings. Now what we are going to look at today is the transportation in plants. So what exactly are the transportation? This session is all about how plants also need the requirements for certain kinds of substances to be transported across their body. So for them also, just like human beings, certain system has to be there, what we generally call as transportation. But there is always a difference between the plants and the animals. So to go forward, let's look at the subtopics what we are going to take today. How do plants obtain the nutrients and how different is it from the human beings? Simple diffusion will not be sufficient for providing any raw materials for a multicellular organisms, and why is that so? Energy needs for different body designs are separate, including the plants and the animals, and how and why? That will be the next question. And what are the tissues which help in transportation? You need some way of communication. So what are those specialized tissues which help in doing this process? The last one will be what are the driving forces which help in xylem to and phloem to transport. Because xylem and phloem will be the major conducting tissues or the vascular tissues which help in transportation. So taking this forward, let's go to the interior of the aspects. So this is a diagram of how the transportation occurs in roots. Before we try to understand what happens in this particular system, let's try to understand few things about plant and animal requirements when it comes to transportation. Plants generally are non-motile, that means they are all stationary, attached with the help of roots. Now these plants will not require as much as energy as required by the animals. So animals go in search of food, water, shelter, whatever the reason is, they move from place to place. So the physical work and the energy requirements are much different than compared to that of the plants. So with that introduction, here the plants, again the unicellular and multicellular organisms when we differentiate. Unicellular organisms have a simple way of doing through the diffusion. But in multicellular organisms, specialized tissues for every aspect or every act of metabolism is needed. So here we look at different vascular tissues and conducting tissues as we go forward. Now how does the transportation occur in plants? We all know plants require certain kind of mineral salts, water and all these to sustain their life first. Later on comes the production of food. First is to take in water and the required inorganic substances in the form of mineral ions or the salts what is required by the plant. For this to do so, you need roots to come into action. Now what is the function of the roots? We see here. Roots just cannot take whatever it needs because it is in direct contact with the soil. Now when the roots are in direct contact, only few substances can be directly taken in through diffusion. But diffusion is not the only way which can help the entire plant, especially the tall plants, to take this particular substances. So for this, they look at different types of pathways and different types of methods to take the water. So simple diffusion will work only when the roots are in direct contact with the soil and there is a concentration difference between the soil and the roots. So whenever there is higher concentration, it will try to pull water from the soil into the roots. So roots might have these extra sugars. So to compensate that, water will be taken from the soil so that it dilutes it and makes it even. Now with that understanding, let's look at the different pathways what happens in the roots. So here on the screen, we can see two different pathways. The first one will be the apoplastic pathway, here as you see on the screens. And the second one is the symplast pathway. Now what is the difference between these two? So I said simple diffusion doesn't need any kind of energy. So it is without any amount of ATP. But as it goes forward and you have higher levels of substances to be absorbed, you do require energy when the molecules have to be taken from a lower levels to a higher levels. That is to draw the water from lower to the higher levels. Now, two pathways we will be understanding. The first one will be the apoplastic pathway. Now, this pathway works only up to the levels where the conducting tissues start, that is at the xylem and the phloem, the structure of a root. Now, this pathway is along the borders of that particular, you can see this. So, it is all along the cell walls. Now, this pathway just touches the regions of the cell wall and the membranes. The other pathway, that is the symplastic pathway. So, you can see all the three parts here, right? Epidermis, cortex and endodermis, which are the different areas of the root. Now, when the water comes onto the Casparian strips level, now these are Casparian strips which will not allow the water to go further because they are all made up of a material, cork material, where the water cannot get inside. Now, from here, it has to take one more pathway which requires energy. Now, that pathway will be the symplastic pathway through which the water will enter directly inside this particular cell. You can see here, it enters directly into the cell and directly to the xylem. Now, this pathway needs energy and this is a symplastic pathway. So, two different pathways together will work out for the transportation of water. Now, this is only to the pathways, but the driving forces of taking in water is entirely different when it comes to transportation. Now, let's look at what are the different tissues which help in transportation. On the screen is the xylem. So, we all know that xylem is the conducting tissue which helps the plant to take water and mineral salts from the soil. Now, xylem is made up of different kinds of structures. So, here we have the tracheids, the vessels, and then you also have the parenchyma. The major portion of the water being taken is through the tracheids and the vessels, and you can see they are all having certain kinds of perforations through which the water is taken in a continuous column to the top of the trees. And how this takes in a continuous way, we will be looking at it further. Now, this is xylem. This is for conduction of water and mineral salts, and most of the xylem tissues are dead in nature. So, they generally do not have any kinds of living tissues. And the next one will be the other conducting tissue, which is phloem. Phloem, you can see the sieve elements in the companion cells. The sieve tubes in the companion cells are always together when it comes to conduction, because whatever the food is prepared by the leaves have to be taken up by the phloem along in contact with the companion cells. Without companion cells, the food cannot enter inside the sieve tubes. Now, this is phloem. This is for conduction of the food which is prepared by the plant. And remember, as the xylem can conduct only in a single direction because it takes water from the roots to the upward portion. So, it is unidirectional, but the phloem here will always be bidirectional because it has to travel everywhere, including the root portion. So, you can also say it is multidirectional. Now, phloem has most of the cells which are living. So, the dead tissues are much less in this. On the whole, the plants, when you compare with the animals, they do have more of the dead tissues as compared to that of human beings. So, whatever the transportation methods are occurring, they all vary, and this is all because of different methods like the diffusion, osmosis, and other kinds of levels, that is the transpiration. So, looking forward now, let's see how roots can draw water from this particular plant. Now, this is one of the theories which is given to understand how water is being taken up through the entire plant from the roots to the tallest tree or the highest point. Now, what you see on the screens is a water potential gradient. So, you can see there is evaporation which is very important for the transportation to occur. Then you have two things, that is the cohesion and the adhesion. Then you have osmosis which occurs in root hairs. So, right from the bottom we can have a look. It starts with the osmosis. First, it is simple diffusion, where the pressure differences will carry so that the water just enters into the salts enter into the roots. Now when the salts enter the roots, there is a concentration levels between the inside of root and outside in the soil. Now what happens? Water will be sucked up from the soil inside the roots by means of a method called osmosis. And you all know what is osmosis. Osmosis is the movement of water from higher to lower levels when we are talking about water. And if the concentration is high in one place, the water tends to move from the other direction inside it. Now with the osmosis happening, the roots will take up whatever water and mineral salts are there, and the salts get diluted by that time. Now what happens after this? Now the roots can be using this particular method of osmosis only to a certain level. Now after a certain level, this system will not work for it, because the diffusion and osmosis can occur very slowly and through a very short period. Now from here we will be looking at another theory here, which is called the transpirational pull theory. We have given here, it's the transpirational pull theory. Now what is transpiration? Transpiration is the loss of water, especially from the leaves during the daytime. So when the weather is very humid, it tends to lose water, and then there is a kind of space created in between the cells. Now this space constantly have to be pulled and filled by certain kinds of substances from the lower cells. Now transpiration is very important for the plant, because this will be the major driving force for the xylem to take up that water in taller plants or in a longer direction. Now this is very, very important, and transpiration is a necessary evil, generally happens in the morning time, because the stomata are generally closed during the night time. So that will be with the transpiration, and this is the major driving force where loss of water occurs through stomata. And during night time, it is only a little bit of root pressure we use it, the pressure differences, which helps to take certain amounts of water and minerals from the soil. Now transpiration, how it happens using two methods, that is cohesion and adhesion. Now we'll understand the terms, what is cohesion and adhesion. Cohesion will be the attraction between two molecules of water, that is like molecules, where they are continuously flowing in a water column. So you can see it here in the picture. Now this will be water molecules which are joined together by an attractive force called cohesion. Now a simple joining of water will not help, right? So it has to be in a continuous column along with the xylem vessels. So for that we have this adhesion, where the water molecules start binding to the walls of the xylem so that they can move across in a continuous column. Now this column being established, you can see here in dots. Now this is being taken up. This is being taken up. Now how evaporation helps is the one question here. So evaporation causes an area to have that space in between. So the cells, if there is transpiration in the next cell, the previous cell will have a higher concentration of that water and mineral salts, so that it will be sucked up to the cell where there is a space to be filled up. Now this happens in a continuous fashion by this particular transpiration, and the water is being taken to the tallest of trees. Now this theory will be the only theory which can explain this, because all the theories help us to understand only for the small plants, not to the tallest of trees. This theory happens on three different aspects. One is the initial osmosis. The next one will be the water molecules and the xylem vessels being in touch or in contact by cohesion and adhesion. And the third one will be the evaporation, which happens from the leaf constantly, so that the water can be pulled from the lower level into the next cell. Now this theory is the theory which can explain transportation in plants. Now this is the theory we follow. Now coming to the next one, we understood that water is done by this transpirational pull theory. Water is being sucked up to the plants. Now what about the food which is being prepared by the plant? The leaf will prepare the food, but leaves cannot store all the food. The food is necessary for all the parts of the plant, including the roots. Now how they get diffused and how they are carried will be the next step, which is done by the phloem. So let's have a look at it, how translocation occurs. Now this is translocation. The food prepared by the plant has to be located to different areas of the plant body. So translocation, moving the food from one place to another. So that's translocation. This is just a diagrammatic explanation of what happens with the sugars. Now we all know whenever there is food prepared in the plant, the leaf will have at higher levels of that particular sugars. Now these sugars have to be moved to different areas of the plant. Now how does this happen? So when a cell has lots of concentration of the stored food, it has to give it to the phloem so that the phloem will carry it across to different parts of the plant. Now how does this do so? All this happens with the help of ATP, because ATP will be a force for the phloem to carry it across in all the directions. Without ATP, this is not possible. Now, this kind of transport, we call it as an active transport. Passive transport won't work here because it has to move in all the directions at different levels, the upper cell, the lower cell, or the sideways. For this to happen, you always need ATP. So, this is all an active process. Now, whatever sugars are prepared by that particular leaf or the cells of the leaf will be translocated into the phloem by using the ATP to move those sugars into the phloem, especially when it has to enter the particular phloem tissues, that is the seed tubes. The companion cells should be there as an aid for them to take the food inside. Now, once the food enters the phloem, it has to be translocated to different parts of the plant or different cells in various directions. For this, you need water. So what happens? The water which is present in the xylem will try to translocate inside the phloem so that the concentrations, the sugar levels get diluted and then they pass through the system. So water from the xylem is very important for translocation of plants, and with this particular increase and decrease of concentrations of these sugars, the plant will be able to transport through phloem to every part of the body. Now, translocation is the name given for this kind of transport. So, you can see here the phloem tissues which are carrying food. Now, there is evaporation of water from leaves and transpiration, and food is prepared by the leaf, and water and mineral salts are all given here so that it can prepare the food. Now, without water and minerals, the plant will not be able to prepare the food. So, once the mineral salts enter, the food is prepared and the food is translocated by means of this active transport. So this is translocation. To conclude this, whatever we saw just now, that is what are the conducting tissues and what are the different aspects of phloem and xylem and how these are all conducted. Before I understand these questions, let's understand that soil plants necessarily, it's not only the confined mineral salts or the water which is essential. Sometimes there will be even nitrogen or other kinds of substances which are all required. Now, how do the plants effort to take this nitrogen? It can be taken through direct atmosphere, but from the soil it happens with the help of, so we must have studied in the lower classes. Now, this happens through a particular kind of bacteria. So, you all know the leguminous plants which contain rhizobium bacteria. Now, this rhizobium bacteria also helps to fix nitrogen for the plant. So, other than nitrogen, they might need phosphorus, they might need manganese, all that will be picked up from the soil in a proportion whenever they require as such. It's not like that all plants require all the minerals at the same point of time. So, whenever the plant requires to do some function, these kind of mineral salts can be picked up from the soil. Now, coming to understand why do plants need less energy than animals? We have already understood that plants will not move. They do not have energy requirements as such to move from place to place, and so the energy levels will always be less as compared to that of animals. Now, what is transpiration and why is the driving force for water to move across the plant? Now, this transpiration is the loss of water, especially from the leaves through stomata. Now, why we called it as a driving force? Because unless the transpiration occurs, there will not be the purpose or the pressure to pull the water from the lower level to the higher level. Only when the water moves out through transpiration, water can be sucked up as a continuous column through transpiration. Now, what is translocation and how does it take place? Translocation is the movement of food prepared by the leaf to different areas of the plant, and then it takes place through the phloem, especially through the sieve tubes and the companion cells. Now, the next question to be answered, what will happen to a plant if its xylem is removed? So, if the xylem is removed, we can understand that there is no water and mineral salts which are being taken up. The plants will utilize whatever water is present in them, and then over a period of time, since no more water is available, the plant will die. And even the food production will get stopped because the plant, whatever food is there, it gets utilized, and new preparation will not happen because there is no water and there is no minerals. So eventually all the plants will die. So that will be, so they cannot sustain without water and food. Now coming to the next question. Plants absorb water from the soil, and explain how does the water reach to the tree top. Now this we understood through the transpirational pull theory. And how does water being absorbed from the soil? It is absorbed by the process first initially through osmosis, and then next comes the transpirational pull theory to explain this particular transportation of water to the tree top. Now coming to the next question, the last one here, plants absorb water from the soil, explain how does the water reach the tree top. It's the same question. So it is also through the transpirational pull theory. So to conclude today, what all we have seen, we have looked at what are the different conduction tissues and why plants also need this transportation, not to that level of animals, but they do need because they need to conduct certain kinds of substances. For them, they do need to prepare food and sustain. Now, in the coming session, we will be looking at the next portion of this particular chapter. So, to keep watching and stay tuned with us, and that's all for today, and thank you.